Hello, I'm Renee Floor, and I've been the owner-operator for 5 years of America's finest crime scene cleaning company.
Hey guys, this is Michael. I've been working with Renee for coming on 3 years now, a year as his general manager, and loving the experiences that every day brings us in this industry.
Hi, my name is Holly Taylor, and I've been in the hazmat industry for 5 years, and I'm finally ready to share my journey with you.
And I'm Sam. I'm a videographer and sound engineer, and I've been working with Renee for about a year now.
It all starts with a phone call. Everyone here has taken the phone and receives the first call. It is never a good reason why someone calls. Hey, I just wanted to chat about my week. No, it's not that call. When you look at the range of what can go wrong and what people need help with, heck, it could be that they have a rodent infestation in their garage. If that freaks you out, then guess what? You're a bit traumatized by having these little critters in your home, and they could get into the attic, and next thing you know, your kid's bedroom. And so, yeah, it can be scary because they carry diseases, right? So when I say as little as that, I don't mean to minimize it, but then it really does go up from there. And that first call for hoarding could be a first call where they let someone pick up on the other line, right? And because they've made an attempt to call 10 times and hung up and say, I can't do this. Either because of shame, or they're overwhelmed, or they don't know where to start, or someone else is prompting them to do it. And now they've just something has happened where they said, you know what, today's the day, I'm done, I got a call, and I'm going to connect with somebody. So they're pretty vulnerable. That's a complex call, but my goodness, the call that comes in that you just got to pull over the car, you got to go to a private space, is the call like one I got on Father's Day. Literally a call on Father's Day, and I'm enjoying brunch with my family to hear a man's voice saying that his son took his life. And I had to tell my family, guys, I have to go and help this gentleman. And he lost his son to a gunshot. That's a really hard call because it really hits close to home. And you're like, you know what? I'm not handing this off to somebody else. I understand where he's coming from. And I'm going to go up there and assemble a team and help him at least the next moment be a little less worse than the last. And make sure he's taken care of, and there's no doubt. And to do it expeditiously with sensitivity and to hear everything he's concerned about and just help him. That's it. And so you don't know what's on the other line. You don't make assumptions. They could be, hey, I got dog poop in the backyard. Great, I'll help you clean that up. But you never know, and you don't make assumptions. Even the ones where you don't even hear a voice for a few seconds, they're maybe too distraught to even call. And they finally broke through, and you just wait for them to talk. And you engage in conversation, go from there. I decided to join an organization as a volunteer. It's a nonprofit organization. It's called TIP, Trauma Intervention Program. And I volunteered. They were gracious enough to accept me. You know, they do a background check, screening, all that. And you go through 2 weeks of training on being a grieving counselor. Really, your job is to help families when someone in their family has passed away. There are normally 7 people that arrive on the scene when 911 is called. The firefighters try to save somebody, and then they're followed almost immediately by someone in the EMT organization. So if someone has passed, your firefighter says, gosh, there's no one to save here. Go ahead and take that. Yeah, and so as I speak, we have a phone call coming in.
Bye, Ellen, this is Holly.
So as you can see, and maybe you heard that slightly, but everything stops when we get a phone call in. Why? Because we are 24/7. We are a trusted and reliable source for folks that just don't know what to do next. So back to my relating this to TIP is that there's a lot that I didn't know about families who grieve when they lose a family member. And I didn't know that, gosh, 7 to 9 people show up, firefighters, EMT, and of course, first responders, because sometimes it is truly a crime scene and not just someone older passing away. Your first responders have to kind of rule out a crime or just investigate any kind of suspicion or just do follow-up, state regulated follow-up. 7 to 9 people ask the same questions. and they are on to the next call that they have to make. So they don't stay long. If they're not of use, they will become of use for another family, right? So what you have there is a family that doesn't know what to do next necessarily. Boy, this is a shock and a surprise, but we have no clue what to do next. And as a volunteer, you learn how to help and answer questions and just be there and not be in a rush and not be called somewhere else and just be there for them. I dedicate one day of every week to being on call. My volunteer time is from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's a 12-hour shift. And certainly I'm awake for some of that, but then I make sure my phone is loud so I can hear a call that comes in at 2 a.m., right? The preparation for that is I have everything I would ever need for a family, whether it's stuffed animals for kids or coloring books if they're very little, because there's just a lot of grieving downtime. It could be hours. And I bring quilts and blankets and these things. Hopefully someone might feel a bit of comfort. I have in the past even brought like a baked banana bread or something that I had prepared for the shift. Just something to comfort folks. And everyone has a different kind of need and expectation. There are many different types of reactions to grief. It's never the same twice. And there's such a variety based on culture, background. Some folks want to grieve with their loved one for a few days, and you have the legal right to do that. Some people, when you get to their home, the way they're dealing with grief is by staying task-oriented, and they really want to get things lined up, even though there's never a rush. There really isn't. So I make sure that, number one, when I get to the scene, that folks feel safe, right? So if there's an accident on the side of the road, I have reflectors and things that I use so that when you're grieving, you may not be in the right frame of mind. And so I'm more detached and I can see the potential for danger. So I make sure that I gather people to the safest place possible. That's number one. You make sure that people are safe. In some cases, I actually spend a little time paying attention to the loved one that's passed, because in some cases that person has passed and died outside. And in the middle of the night in rural areas, if folks have to make phone calls and go back to their house, it's really not a good idea to leave your loved one alone, and you might be the only one. So when I arrive, I may be the one sitting with a loved one. I might cover them with a blanket, and I might have a pillow and take care of their loved one and assure their safety, meaning that there's no wildlife, there's no one in the neighborhood that's curious, and I keep the dignity and try to keep the privacy even in public areas while that person can make phone calls, or vice versa, where I can go off and make phone calls and they stay with their loved one. So it's almost like you let the client lead in a dance almost, and the dance is very slow and it's very understanding, and you're not there to fix anything. You're there to be present. You're there to listen. You're there to answer questions if they're asked. If you don't know something an authority does, then you make the phone call to that authority. They should have the space and time to grieve. So I help with those arrangements and really any other technical questions to help them. I generally don't leave the family until someone has come for their loved one. I never leave a situation unless it's dangerous. And if it's dangerous, then I call for additional help. In certain cases where there's an overdose, there can be some high emotions, because when someone maybe has used drugs and they've overdosed and it's a big surprise and they're young, and then they have friends who maybe use drugs too, and then it becomes this thing where, who gave it to them or how much what did they use? And it becomes this argument with family and folks that person who died hangs out with. And then it becomes a little untenable and maybe even a little unsafe. I am also someone who calls in for backup for my organization, but to also call in other people to help, whether it's from mental health, whether it's additional first responders, or even if I know something that's not safe that I need firefighters for. I'm there to witness that and be an advocate for everybody, and then allow someone to have space to grieve.
When I first started, grief was something I was pretty scared of. I just knew I would struggle with it a little bit, because there's not really any good things that you can say, but there are a ton of bad things that you can say. So when I first started, I had this idea that I would get better at speaking with grieving family members, but nothing really changed. I haven't gotten any better at it because it's just different every time you go on scene. So it's kind of hard to have like a routine that you do every time because it wouldn't fit everywhere. So I learned that pretty quickly. I've gotten more comfortable with it rather than better at it. So it's kind of frustrating in a sense because you can't just learn it and just do it every time. Some people are just inconsolable. I showed up on a scene before where a 4-year-old girl had gotten run over. It was a hit and run, and she died on the scene. And while I was cleaning it, I could hear her mother wailing in the background. That's something you would have to go to and just be there. There's absolutely nothing that you can say to somebody that's going through that. You can't learn that. It's just not something that you can learn.
Holly's engagement is a bit unique in that she is sometimes first to scene, meaning that there's still a body there. It's not released. There are cops on site, first responders on site, and it could be a whole host of different people, especially roadside. There could be a lot of people involved, tow trucks, etc., and firefighters still there and EMT. So
family members showing up too.
And what Holly's exposed to is more immediate, meaning there's usually an event, it's fairly traumatic, and it's shocking, right? The kind of grief and trauma and emotions that I assume she sees.
So I got a pretty interesting question the other day. I talk a lot about my job on Reddit and other social media sites. And somebody asked me if I've ever had to start or do a cleaning while the body was still there. And my answer was yes. Actually, 2 times. The first time, it was a really bad motorcycle accident. Basically, his leg was hanging on by a thread. A high-speed motorcycle crashed into an electric box and hit a sign, which ripped his leg nearly in half. Typically, when we get there, the body has already gone, but law enforcement usually makes all these calls at the same time. The tow truck, medical, transport, us. And it's all kind of a race of who gets there first. And sometimes a medical examiner is busy. So unfortunately, the body is stuck in the middle of the road with a yellow blanket over it for a couple hours. When the medical examiner was checking out the victim that I was just talking about, when she rolled him over, he was leaking from everywhere, basically, and there was a sewer nearby. We can't have blood in the sewer, and my job is to make sure that the environment is safe after the incident. So I was putting rags down and soaking up the blood, and it felt a little distasteful. It just felt kind of wrong, but I was there to do a job, and I had to do it. The other time was where a woman jumped out of a 15 I believe there were 15 floors. She jumped out of her window. That was after she had thrown her television out the window, her couch cushions. I mean, when I showed up on scene, there was just stuff everywhere. There was like couch cushions in the shrubs and a TV and right near it's kind of partially in the hot tub, which was right where she landed. She didn't land in the hot tub. She landed right on the side of the outdoor hot tub that the facility had. And she bled into the hot tub, and there were also fragments all over the place, all at the pool area. I'm not sure why the ME took so long to get there, but I did start pumping the water out of the hot tub before they came. And that also felt a little wrong, especially when a family member shows up. If a family member does show up, I do stop cleaning. I take my stuff, I put it aside, and I let them have their time, because sometimes they just want to stare at the spot where they lost their loved one. They want to look at the puddle of blood, and sometimes they even take photos. Sometimes they take it out on you, but you just, they're grieving. Maybe they're trying to find somebody to blame because they haven't accepted it yet. Yeah, it's really, really awkward cleaning when there's bodies just laying there. But it doesn't happen very often at all.
I do think it's important to witness visually myself what the family has seen, if they allow me to. If they've invited me into their sanctuary and it's okay, I usually say, can I check on your loved one? And I want to make sure that when I see their loved one, that after the first responders get there, they might leave a lot of their paraphernalia to assist in trying to resuscitate. And that can be difficult. So I like to see how their loved one has been left. if there's an intubation tube or other things that have been left with their loved one and they have obviously passed, I will then ask permission to say, is it okay if I take care of your loved one a little bit and remove some of the medical devices that they've used to try to assist?
Yeah, it's not pretty.
It's
pretty.
not
Gloves and
yeah.
tubes everywhere. It's not a pretty sight for them to see.
So anything that I can do to prevent further traumatization, right? So there's trauma of having lost somebody. There's trauma of 7 strangers coming into your home, although trusted and licensed and trained. So much happens to you so quickly that your brain can't catch up to the variety of things that are hitting you all at the same time. And then you have family members who also react differently. So Sam, when you ask how people react, some people get angry. Like if they're, that's my son and I should have been here and it's my fault and this and that, or, gosh, they told me they weren't feeling real well or what, I should have been there. Or you have a lot of that guilt / anger and grieving. And sometimes family members, if someone is been on palliative care or hospice, they may not be as so surprised because it's been a longer journey for them, but they're still shocked. They still are grieving for loss, but it just looks different. They think they're more prepared for it, but then as the night wears on, it hits them that that person's not there anymore, right? Even though you've known for 6 months, 9 months, a year, the fact that this is the time. At 9:08, the time of death is this. And even though you might have known it's been coming, the biggest moment of surprise is when transporters come in. They're calm in their approach. They're very respectful. They always ask permission for every move they make, but they still have to get a metal gurney that clinks and clanks up your stairs. It's industrial looking. It's not quiet. And it is a signal that your loved one is about to leave your home on a gurney. I'll really tell my client, hey, this is what's going to happen. And if you want any part of this experience to be different, and I'll try my best to make it as tolerable as possible. But I warn them and I say, listen, this is what's going to happen. They're 2 gentlemen. I know them. They're great guys. I've known them for years, and they're going to come in respectfully and help take your loved one to a safe, secure place. They will give you an opportunity to say a final goodbye if you'd like. You can do that at any point, before, during, after, however you want to do it, but I will tell you and I will help you communicate that. Once that happens, they say a last goodbye, they're on the gurney. They may follow them right out to the van. They may follow them watching the loved one go in the van. And at that point, they just may absolutely melt. With permission, I usually hug somebody if everyone's good with that. And, usually some physical touch, whether it's just an elbow or a shoulder, or if someone wants to hug me or lean on my shoulder, that's what I'm there for, right? Because that is such a critical moment, especially if there's not a lot of family around. If it's just you and the husband or wife, and it's just the 2 of you, at that point, you're the person that they have physically to see. When that happens, I just make sure that we have someone, a family member, a friend that would follow through and come in after me and sit and stay with the family member. If not, I'll stay a little bit longer. But generally, when I volunteer, and I volunteer the whole night shift, I will usually stay when I know that the client is safe and that the body, and that's a real hard thing not to do. You really don't refer to a client's loved one as a body. And I always refer to the loved one by their name and whatever their title is. If they're mom, I'll say, your mom's, going to be well taken care of. Anne is going to be well taken care of. Bob is going to be well taken care of. And I don't really talk about their loved one in the past tense. That's for the client to talk about, not for me. I will talk to them like they're present, and I will take care of them like they're alive. Essentially, I'll give them a blanket, I'll give them a pillow to make sure that they're comfortable, even though I know for a fact they're not alive, because I don't know what stage of recognition that client's going to be in. Sometimes it just has not dawned on them yet that that person is not alive. I don't sugarcoat it. I say things like, usually they died of rather than they passed away of. So you try to use nouns and verbs that are direct, but not caustic, but they're also not euphemistic where you're pretending that the person's still alive either. It's a fine line on being respectful and not giving someone false hope that that person may may come back to life, right? And so, what not to say, right? They're in a better place. I mean, those are maybe your opinions and your judgments, but you don't know. Heck, the family might think that guy was a bastard and they wanted him to die. I don't know. I mean, it's terrible to say, but sometimes anything you say, you never know that someone in the room might have. How do you know they're going to be in a better place? And so you don't say things like that. And you just follow the lead of the person you're with, and support them in allowing them to grieve without fixing things or guiding things or adding judgment to things. And the better you do that and take yourself out of it, the better it is. And just be there, be present. I make mistakes all the time. You walk into a home and you're ready to help and you're eager to do so. And you go, hey, how's it going? And like, oh, okay, dude, how's it going? Not good. So you get in the habit of not saying things like that. And your delivery, and even upon your arrival, is it's solemn and respectful. You're being invited into someone's home and sanctuary at that point, and it's announcing your name and saying, first responders have called me to be with you in this time of grieving and to answer any questions that I have. My name is X, and I'm going to be helping you the best way I can, and just to be with you during these times. That's it. There's no pretense. There's no agenda. You just announce who you are and say that you're there for them.
Law enforcement relies heavily on you guys because they're not the greatest when it comes to grieving. They're there to do something else, There was this another motorcycle accident. That's why I'm so afraid of motorcycles now. The guy actually survived. He was a 17-year-old kid. His family was on site. There were shards of his shin bone all over the place. There was like an Easter egg hunt, walking around trying to find little pieces of this kid. And his family was on site, and an officer came up to me with a Ziploc bag and handed me 3 fingers right near his family. They were still connected by the web of the finger. They just came up to me and handed it to me like that's just not their job to handle trauma like that. I'm sure they have a certain type of, de-escalation training and probably even grief training, but that's just not what they're there for,
And it's tough because the frequency of incidents that first responders come in contact with, like I said, I've got 35 calls where I'm seeing a dead body, right? And that's over the span of 4 years. They're probably seeing that in a month or 2 months. And so the number of things that they see at the level that they see them, it's because it's nuts. They see everything, and they have to be a coach counselor sometimes on the spot to de-escalate something. But in self-preservation, when you get that over and over and over again, you have to practice a boundary and detachment so that you're not affected by every single call.
What do you say, too? I always find myself asking, even driving on a site where I have a little bit of information, what do I say? What do I say? And I get on site and I'm still thinking, what do I say? What do you say to a woman that was driving along downtown with her niece, and a man jumps on her car who has slit his throat so deep that he was halfway decapitated? That's how deep he cut his throat, and he just panicked and ran into traffic. I'm sure there was drugs involved, and he jumped on her car while she was driving. And there was probably a 50-yard blood trail and a white car covered in blood, and just 2 really disturbed people standing outside the car. I had to clean their car off for them. What do you say to them? How you doing? How's it hanging?
When I'm on the job, I have to get scientific, right? I mean, we're there to do a job, and you're looking at things like, okay, the coagulation time of that blood is X amount of minutes, and we've been on site for 15, and that's not going to get any better. Now I'm going to have to unstick that and this and that and the other. I remember handling a call with Holly in Newport. And the gentleman, I believe, had terminal cancer. And he was put together enough to realize, hey, I'm going to die, and I don't want my family to worry about me. Like, it's just going to happen. I don't want them coming to a hospital and doing all that, because he decided to kill himself, complete suicide, in his bathroom, in a shower, because he thought that was the best place to do it, to cause as little headache and follow-up as possible. He just knew that his body would be taken and that his bodily fluid would go down the drain. He even prepared 2 gallons of solution, cleaning solution that he thought would help, bleach and vinegar. I remember it outside of the bathroom, like, that's just an odd place to store bleach and vinegar. I'm like, no, he was preparing, to say, hey, listen, if you're going to have to clean up after me, here are the materials right there. Now, again, you go back to science, and yes, if that person is quickly recovered, that fluid that he has is still viscous, right? But when it starts to dehydrate, it coagulates. It's a colloid, so it turns into a solid over time with the evaporation of liquid, right? So in a sense, the blood that's pooled in the drain is now solid, right? It's now this giant, in a sense, scab. We can't let that go down into the sewer. I mean, it's just so we have to sanitize everything, and then we have to unplug it and remove the solid matter from the shower. So the public's like, oh, just put bleach on it and it's fine, and let all that stuff go down the drain. It's just not.
They don't have very realistic expectations of our cleanups. They just don't think about it. And honestly, we are such a new industry. A lot of towns just don't have the budget for us. They'll have the EMTs throw some saline solution on a puddle of blood outside and call it a day, or they'll have the fire department come and spray it around. They just don't have the budget for us. And that's totally understandable. But a lot of the times they do have these unrealistic expectations of our cleaning, as if we just wipe it up off the floor and we're good to go. But the reality is blood is liquid. It takes time to investigate, and usually it's sitting there for at least a few hours. It does get into the cracks of the floor. If we just clean the surface and it looks good, they'll come in and walk around for a little bit and their floor will bleed. There will be blood in the cracks and it will seep up. It needs to be removed. Most of the time it needs to be removed because it will go through layer and layer until the subfloor. Obviously demo costs more, and probably pisses people off that we have to, and we've gotten a lot of people that don't want us to pull up floor, but we have to make it very clear, change the work order, and let them know that it's going to smell. It is bio. They're going to smell it. People are going to smell it. And it's wait till they see what it looks like when they pull it up. I'll rip off a molding or something that's not even near where the body was, and there are maggots in there. And if you leave it, it is going to smell forever, and you're going to keep coming back, and it's going to be a never-ending cycle.
Definitely. There's been many a job where we will completely clean a floor, looks beautiful, even tests great, and then you break into that second layer and it's a whole nother puddle of blood underneath. You wouldn't think it would be there, but it is.
And it's like a target too when it goes into carpeting. You see a small spot, and underneath on the padding, just physics, it's bigger. And same thing with the subfloor as well. It just gets bigger and bigger, and it needs to be removed.
There is some thought as to where folks complete suicide, right? There is some thought, and it does add to grieving, right? We've seen angry suicides, meaning that, you know what? I'm going to do this in the garage with my hand tools and a chainsaw and create as much mess as I can because I'm pissed. And I'm going to make sure everyone has to clean me up because I'm pissed about something.
Absolute last fuck you to the world.
Yep. And the trauma that creates is unbelievable. And others will, we've seen, hey, the person had, GSW, gunshot wound to the head. And you're like, okay, we're going to bring 4 people because we know it's going to be everywhere. And they have taken the time, used a low caliber weapon, and they've used a pillow, and all of the impact goes into pillow. And you're thinking, my goodness, the amount of thought it took for someone to be as least of a burden that they can, and it's usually actually that person that has some kind of illness that they know they're not going to live that much longer. They just don't want to see their family, grieving over them, suffering for months. And it's just, everyone's different in how they grieve and how they die in ways that they either make that last message, they leave a note, or they don't leave a note, or they leave a mess, or they don't leave a mess. It's just, every single case is different. And yeah, suicides do happen in bathrooms because there's water there and it's tile, and the perception is you can clean it. But like Holly's saying, when it gets into grout, it just goes and follows gravity. And you're like, oh, you have to remove the toilet. Well, yeah, because guess what? that's floating on grout, and it's above a wood surface, and now that's wood's being inundated.
It's awful delivering that news that you have to do demo to, as if it, I don't want to be running a circular saw in front of a family that's just wants their home back and wants to be able to continue grieving. Um, I think it was probably the only free bio job I did before was ex-military guy in his 40s or 50s was living with his mother, who was on a fixed income. He came into the living room and told her to call the police, and she was a little confused about that, but she picked up the phone and she kept an eye on him, and he pulled a gun out and he shot himself in the head right in front of his almost 90-year-old mother. She had no homeowners insurance. She had no money, fixed income. I'm guessing he was helping her with some of the bills. And she just kept repeating what happened over and over and over and over again from the top. I was there for probably 3 hours, and she just told the story over and over again for the entire time. I did have to tear up carpet because he did it on carpeting. She did watch me the whole time and just kept repeating. I don't know if that comforted her or not, but I just kept listening, and that was really hard to leave a 90-year-old woman by herself after watching her son do that to her. That was one of those jobs where, sorry. That was one of those jobs where you drive home and you're just like, what the fuck am I doing? It's hard to figure out if you're proud of yourself or scared for yourself.
The thing is, I go on calls, and I know it's weird to say this, but I'm like, please don't be a kid. Please don't be a kid. Please don't be a kid. Please don't. And I'm like, because I know what happens, right? Even on tip calls that, there's infant death or whatever, or something happens to a child because of an accident. And you're like, oh my, it just overwhelms you because it hits so close to home. Here's what I would tell you, that visiting people and helping them grieve, you come home and go, what the fuck am I worried about? I'm healthy. I'm upright. I got, 3 great kids, a beautiful wife, a great, group of people I work with that all care. And so it just reinforces the fact that, hey, any little problem I'm having, any little dispute or argument, I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm here. And that is life's struggle. It's a struggle. You come out of it and you're stronger for it, or you've experienced it, or you can share that strength, or you have an understanding of how someone else struggles and you don't overlook it. But if you've never experienced any of that, you might just walk right by the person on the street or the person asking for help. And when you see certain situations, you may just stop and go, okay, no, I'm helping you today. You're the one today. And because it's the right thing to do, and it's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And so I think exposure to that, yes, is tough to handle, but at the end of the day, you're more grateful for the things that you have, and you're able to share more than kind of being insulated from all that. I truly think. It's not to mean that you're searching for that stuff, but now you're not afraid if something comes along to just step in and help and engage, and not just put blinders on. And in that sense, that's who we have. All of us on this team have just different capabilities, different backgrounds, different strengths, different weaknesses, but you can't hire dicks. You can't hire people that are assholes. Everyone here has some kind of caregiving thread through them, whether they've done caregiving jobs or taking care of animals or elderly or kids or whatever. It's that need to take care of yourself, your others, and your client, because that's what you're doing. So if you're not about that, you cannot fake this. You can't phone this in. You can't be a robot about it.
It's hard to sometimes tell the difference between feeling empathetic for somebody and having your own grief with the situation. So it's really important that when you go home, you grieve properly and in a healthy way. You talk about it with your spouse. You call your mom and talk about it. You don't have to get into detail about it, but it's really important that that you take care of your mental health after a lot of the stuff that we see. I always say that this is such a new industry, and 10 years from now, I think it's going to be completely different. I feel like right now, because it's so new, it's kind of the wild west of the industry. And there's not as many regulations. And is there going to be mandatory therapy? Is there, all kinds of things that, even I can consider at this point. And it doesn't make sense why a lot of the stuff just isn't already a thing. But I think we have a lot of work to do in the industry.
So one steam valve on grieving and seeing heavy shit is that, you might rip up that carpet and see an outline of somebody, and you might say something like, shit, that was a big boy. And it's not because you're callous and heartless. It's you don't know what to do with fuck, no one cleaned that up and someone lived here. And so you got to let something out. I mean, it's like an episode of MASH where they're joking about death. It's not funny, but you don't know what to do with it. And you can't let it bottle, and you got to feel it at some point. The trick is not doing that when anyone's around, right? And to be really super sensitive. But at some point you're at the medical waste facility and there's no one there, and you're doing the last steps away from your client, and there's got to be a valve that gets released somewhere. It can't all be this heavy. And you just, at some point, just got to say, thank God I'm healthy and my family's healthy and my friends are healthy, because it could be a whole lot worse.
The paradoxical reactions you see to grief are interesting sometimes. You mentioned earlier, Renee, that, sometimes the family is not grieving because the person who died was an abusive parent or somebody who treated them poorly. I remember we did a horde, and the adult kids, about 3 siblings, were standing in the front yard just swapping stories about all the horrible things their dad had done to them. I felt bad for the old man who died alone. Then to hear all these stories and all the things he had said and done to them, I was like, God, this guy was a monster. And I was just curious, for you guys, what are the most unexpected reactions that you've seen to grief that just totally caught you off guard?
I have one real big example, and I'm going to give you some details about it. It was so egregious that we actually stopped work, and that's never happened because we put our help hat on. I mean, we walk into a home, it's hoarding, it turns into gross filth, and then we discover that the rooms that we're cleaning, one young daughter is living here alone, and there's animal feces everywhere that the daughter is living in, and she's probably 12, 10. And we're like, okay. And we keep cleaning, and we see another room. Well, there's elderly and the same situation. So now we have elder abuse, and we keep cleaning, and we're talking about it. And then we see the animals, and the animals look like they're from another planet. I'm not even joking. Someone took a picture of a dog, and I'm like, what is that? Is that a squirrel? It's a dog. I'm like, that is not a fucking dog. It was matted, and the dog's eyes were hanging out of its head. It was like, our clients were absolutely, their bedroom was fine. They were normal. They had access to someone's money, and they were sitting in that home just watching TV and eating. And either the parents or some elderly family member, they were completely ignored. It was, and so my team was plugging along as best they could amongst the maggots and flies and all that stuff. And just knowing that we had to make this cleaner for the people living here, but we sure as shit weren't going to come back for day 2. And that as soon as we were done, we pick up the throne to 3 agencies: elder abuse, child abuse, and Humane Society. I wasn't even sure we were going to get paid, and I didn't care. My thing was to protect the people on my team, their safety and mental health, but also people in that home. And it's really tough. It's really tough because you're asked to do something better for a family and clean them. And you know that the phone calls you just made, there's going to be consequences. It's going to be a surprise visit. Like, there's still There's still evidence of that abuse, even though you've cleaned the best you can. You can't hide holes in the wall. You can't hide mold. There's so much more that has to be done. That dog will still look like that. That kid will still have that trauma. Those elderly family members are still going to have matted hair and all the stuff that because they're not cared for. So it was really, really tough. And that was like a group grieve. Like, we are doing something about this, but we just got to get through our day the best way we can and help these folks the best way we can right now, and then also call somebody.
I'll tell you what always takes me off guard. What always takes me by surprise is nonchalance. Sometimes it just hasn't hit them yet, probably in shock. A good example was a suicide, and the wife of the deceased was showing us the property, and he had burnt his Bible and then went into his little hobby room that he had and shot himself with a shotgun. His wife was very nonchalant about it. She showed me where the Bible was. It was burnt on the ground, exactly where she said it would be. And she just looked at me and shrugged her shoulders and said he overreacted. He just overreacted. She was referring to his home that had just flooded. He had spent years trying to fix his home from a previous disaster they had, and they were basically out of money, out of savings, and his whole house flooded. And obviously that wasn't why he killed himself. I'm sure there was a lot that built up to that. It was just a trigger or a good excuse for him to do it then. But his wife was just so... I've never seen anybody react that way to a death. He overreacted. That's something that you would say if he got upset and raised his voice, not shot himself brutally in the head. It always just surprises me when I see somebody in shock that is not quite getting it yet, the reality of it.
I remember that one too. You had two ex-military, they met in the military, and they had a number of issues, health issues from the military, a number of accidents that had plagued them. He had a lot of leg and back injuries and was in a good amount of pain. And they were looking for this country home to just be in and enjoy their life. And through all that pain, he still had built additions and did all of that effort. And then it got flooded, and their insurance company didn't pay for anything, because they called it force majeure and that wasn't covered and this and that. And so he then again, in his retirement, in his physically weakened state, tried to recover from the flood. And a part of that happened again, and they had no recourse, and he was just at his limit. He shot himself in his work area, in his wood shop. It was pretty bad. It was everywhere, actually. I want to say his brother was pretty distraught. I was there when they picked up his body, and there really wasn't enough for them to say goodbye to. But the wife was, she had been through a lot, and she was exhausted. And I don't want to say relieved, but you're right. It is a weird reaction, but she's like, I'm so exhausted from all of this that.
You can tell when people are low key expecting it too.
Right.
Like it's something that they knew was a strong possibility.
You have to understand where someone's coming from. And I'll tell you what's really, I had no idea this was going to be a benefit, but when you're in an organization with 200 volunteers, some have volunteered for over 25 years, and they've gotten so many different types of training on so many different kinds of things that happen. They talked about the tank rolling through town. They talked about a shooting at a school. I mean, some of these volunteers have been American Red Cross certified and trained, and they're part of CERT and these other organizations, and they come in. Some have been nurses, and there isn't a more lovely, caring, nurturing group of people. Every time you're on a call, you must debrief with your dispatcher. And you talk about the call you were just on. Why? Because the grieving that you're helping other people, you're now somewhat absorbing, witnessing, and you're now a part of. You start to understand and hear all the family history that they're willing to share with you, the pictures on the wall, all the family dynamics. And sometimes it takes a really strong debriefing. If it's something familiar, something that's affected you. There was an occasion working in my business where I just made a routine collections call. Someone who it was a pretty personal relationship in that There was a lot of trust that had to happen between her and I, meaning that she was calling me from a rehab center. She wasn't able to get to her home, and she disclosed that she had left 2 dogs who were her only companions. She left them at home for a few days. It might have been even longer. She told me where she hid a key and let me in the home, and all that stuff is super. You have this level of trust, and we go in, and it's bad. The dogs had been alone for a few days, and they just literally went through everything. They soiled the entire home because they weren't let out. So we got the place to where it looked like nothing had ever happened. We got in touch of neighbors and family and friends to help us with pet care. We lost contact with her for a little bit. I decided to visit her in person, knock on the door, and there was no answer. And her mail was piling up a bit. And I then talked to the neighbor and says, no, she came home. Her car was in the driveway. But at a certain point, it just didn't feel right. I saw lights on, and the neighbor said, listen, I have her keys. She allows me to come into her property. I said, listen, if we go and do a wellness check on her now, let's call 911. But I don't know that we should wait, because if we could help her right now, I think we should probably check on her. So the neighbor went with me, and the neighbor's friend. There were 3 of us that walked back there. And I say back there, went through her backyard, and she has a huge pool, and I half kind of expected her to be in it and not alive. And that didn't happen, and I was relieved. But the 10 sliders she had on the back of her house were all open. The wind was blowing, the lights were on, and I called for her, and she didn't respond. And I, with the 2 ladies behind me, kind of bravely, I was very familiar with the home at that point because we had done a cleaning in it. And I rounded a corner, and she was right there, dead on the floor, her eyes wide open, completely naked. And it shocked me. And not many things shocked me. It shocked me. And I brought that story back to my grieving group. They just really wrapped their arms around me and let me talk about it for as long as I'm talking about it now. I still see her face, an athletic, vibrant woman who just had issues with drugs and alcohol, taken too early, basically. And so I know that this is what families must see. They must walk into something like that. They must come home and see their loved one who has completed suicide, or something has happened, and it's shocking. And for me, I wasn't a family member, but I certainly had discussions with her, and I took care of her home, and I found a place for her dogs. And even at that level, it affected me quite a bit. But that grieving organization really is something else, man, because they really pick you up, and they really support you. Not trying to fix me, just trying to be there for me, which meant a lot.
That's going to do it for this week. If you need more of your America's Finest Fix, find us on Instagram at AF Crime Scene Cleaners. Next week, we're going to tackle how we take care of ourselves mentally as technicians. Thank you all for listening.